If relationships are the real currency in life, if referrals are the lifeblood of business, how do we, the entrepreneurs, the small business owners, compete in this ever-changing, fast-paced world? How do we become more so we can attract more? Those are the questions, and in this podcast, we will reveal the secrets.
Hey, I want to welcome you to the Referral Secrets podcast. My name is Tony Crawford, and I have the distinct privilege of being your host today. May I ask you some questions? Are you thinking about the next level in your career? Have you come to realize that who you know is more important than what you know? If you answered yes to either of these, then you are in the right place. Our guest today was named one of Forbes' top 25 networking experts. She's the author of 4 books, including the internationally recognized The 11 Laws of Likeability and her latest, The Connector's Advantage. She's also a regular in the media on leadership and workplace effectiveness, appearing on CBS, NBC, NPR, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Working Mother, and Forbes, among others. Hey, when not engaging audiences, she is an expert chauffeur to her kids. She's an average skier, skilled walker of her 2 rescue dogs, and she's known for helping people work better together and advance their individual impact. Please help me give a warm welcome to author, speaker, and the woman who just learned how to ride a bike, Tillis Ledermen.
Let's just say how grateful I am that you're here with us today. I am so excited to have you here and so confident that our listeners are going to have so much content that they can pull from on this interview that will help them in their journey to becoming a better connector. And for me, I thought I was great at connecting. And then reading your book, I was, oh my gosh, I need to take it up to that next level. It was such an eye-opener for me. So I am so excited to really talk about your book, The Connector's Advantage. But let's share with our listeners a little bit about Michelle Tillis Ledermen, your journey, and what brought you to this becoming a connection creator.
Well, it definitely was a journey because I actually am a recovering CPA. I come out of finance and spent 10 years there. But just always growing up, I always felt I was a bit of a polarizing personality. I have a big personality and people loved me or they really, really didn't. And that actually drove my initial research around the concept of likability in my first book, The 11 Laws of Likeability, and really understanding, what to do before, during, and after a conversation to enable somebody to see what is likable about you, because you can't make them like you. But I wanted to understand what I was doing to make them not like me, because that's definitely possible. And the work evolved. I really started from working in finance and seeing the really ineffective and inefficient and inappropriate communications on the trading floor and within the finance ranks. And I was the only woman on the floor. So that was a whole nother story. And while working for a bank, I said, hey, I can do all this other stuff. And they said, okay. And that's kind of where things start, is the belief and the desire. And so while still working full-time in finance, I started to do this work on the side and re-educate myself. I got appointed to NYU as an adjunct professor back in 2004. And that's the same year I started the business. So we're celebrating 17 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And then I was teaching training courses, and one of my courses was called The Natural Networker. And it was for the MoMA of New York City, the Museum of Modern Art. And somebody came up to me after it. I'll never forget him. His name was Guru. But he came up to me afterward. He said, this should be a book. I was like, yeah, I've been thinking about it. He's like, no, this should be a book. And I was like, oh, you know what? Yeah, this book will write itself. 3 years later, the first book came out in 2011. And then I've had a book in 2013, 15, and my latest, The Connector's Advantage, is 2019. And that is a follow-up to the likability book, because when I think about likability, it is really about this word networking, which I really hate, because it has the word work in it.
Right.
I
Okay.
like to say connect. And so the Connector's Advantage is actually a follow-up that builds on those concepts. And it's really more a way of being and thinking than in just what we do. So I saw a change in everything I did. People actually asked me, like, how did I get JP Morgan as my first client? And how did I get Deutsche Bank as the second? And Morgan Stanley was in the top 3. So I got name brand clients, and these concepts, these mindsets, this approach to life and to people is how I did it. And so me seeing what a difference it's made in my life, and I'm happier and I'm healthier, and I have statistics that back up all this stuff, it's because of this. And so why shouldn't I share it? Right.
Right. Absolutely. And I love how you focus on the word connector versus networking, because it seems that in the business world, that word networking is overused, and it is a negative. So the Connector's Advantage, just that title and the fact that you are a connection creator, that is just, that really spoke to me.
You'll notice the last line of the book is networking is something you do, but a connector is who you are. And that's the real shift that we need to make in our thinking, because oftentimes we'll go out and we'll network for purpose, for need.
Right.
But connecting is something that we do in all of our interactions, no matter where we are, no matter what we're thinking about, no matter who we're with. We're thinking about, how do I connect with this other person? And everything else follows.
Mhm. You are so right. So in the introduction, the first paragraph in your introduction began with, I am not lucky. And that first paragraph ended with, I am not lucky, I am a connector. I love that. Share with our audience what inspired you to really share your experience and write this book. I know you did a little bit, but let's dive into that.
After I wrote the 11 Laws of Likeability, the, business and work and world kind of got really big, and I started doing keynotes, and I started doing more training, and a lot of management and leadership work. And what the Connector's Advantage did was bring it all together. So this book does apply, really, it's kind of evergreen. Anybody can benefit from it, but it really does take a perspective of, when we are leaders, and we are all leaders, whether people are reporting to us or not, we have people who follow the way we think and the way we act, whether it is family, friends, children, parents, or employees and coworkers. So this was really bringing not just the concepts of connection, but the concepts of leadership, and how do we take these concepts not just to our individual relationships, but the relationships with our company, with our brand.
Right. Wow. Just, okay. Some good information here. So your book is actually filled with some examples featuring people from different walks of life, your members from your own family, high-powered CEOs. Who do you feel will benefit the most from reading this book?
It's an interesting question, and the publishers always hate when you say it's for everyone. Which, again, as I say, if you want to be happier and healthier, be more connected, it does apply universally. But what I would say is the people who would really adopt the mindsets and embrace the concept of this book are people who are high achievers, people who want and strive for success and for action, right? So the doers of the world.
Now, and you shared with me a few minutes ago about an upcoming book club.
Yes.
Tell our listeners about this.
I am so excited. People have been nudging me about this for a while. And I always say the things that you do in life fall into 4 categories: get to, want to, should do, have to.
Mm.
The get tos and the want tos are really easy to be authentic and energized about. The should do's and have tos, not so much. So I always say, if you think you should, you shouldn't. And everybody was telling me I should do this, I should do this course, and I should turn this. And I was like, I don't want to. So instead, I hired somebody else to help me do it.
Nice.
So I want to have a book club. I didn't want to actually have to create all of the micro lessons. So I partnered with High Tide, and we will put a link right there for you. Our inaugural session is July 1st. We will run more than one, but the first one's going to be the best one. So join us on July 1st, and you will be part of a community which is already helping you connect, that is going to work with you through these daily micro lessons. And each micro lesson each day is less than 15 minutes. And
nice.
They come straight to you through the app. So and not just the micro lessons, you get a live Q&A with the group where I answer all the questions that you have. So it's really fun. It's really exciting. And it is the idea, and you, having read my work, know I am actionable and practical. This isn't just theoretical. This is, how do I do this?
Yes.
And let's put it into action.
Yes. You know, I want to talk a moment. This past year has been very different for people. And from reading your book, you talk about how that social connection is so important to our well-being. Now, while restrictions are being lifted, people are still cautious. What can you share with our listeners to help them navigate through this until we get back to what we know as somewhat normal?
Yeah, it's actually been really interesting, because I think although we have been isolated in some ways, we have opened up our connections in others, because people are more willing to do this and to get on and seek out those connections. We have greater opportunity to form relationships when we're in this remote situation. So it's both an opportunity and a detriment, depending on how tech savvy you are, which I'm sure your listeners are if they are listening to this. So, a few statistics that might help to understand the impact to health and happiness. Gallup does an engagement survey, 12 questions only. One of those questions is, do you have a best friend at work? And the reason is that when we have close work relationships, we improve our productivity by 50%, and it actually predicts our happiness on the job. So we are more engaged when we look forward to the relationships that we have at work. When you think about social isolation and the epidemic, and it's so much worse now post-COVID, it actually affects your health and your mortality. It is a bigger impact on your mortality than obesity. And it is as equaled on your mortality as if you smoked 15 cigarettes a day for 10 years. So really, we need those points of connection. And I get it. We might not be shaking hands yet, or hugging and kissing, and we're still doing elbow bumps or fist bumps, and that's fine, because connection doesn't have to be physical touch. It has to be emotional and mental connection with other people, feeling heard, feeling seen.
Yes.
And we'll get back to that touch at some point.
Yes. So let's talk about your first book, the 11 Laws of Likeability. That book focused on networking. So how does the Connector's Advantage build on this previous book?
So the 11 Laws of Likeability talks about what to do before, during, and after a conversation. So it is tactical about, how do we get into the right mind frame? What do we do during that conversation? And then how do we move from conversation to extended connection? So we move through it, and we look at the laws that enable connection. And that's great, but it's not thinking about, who do I want to be? And a connector, if that's who you want to be, that's a shift. We're shifting to how we approach life and everything that we do, with a prioritization on people. Yes. And so when we think about that, a connector has 7 mindsets, and I'll list them, and you can choose any ones you want to talk about. And keep in mind, these mindsets are not linear. It's not, I have to do one, then the next, just as the laws of likability are not linear. So the first, and everyone says, what's the most important? I mean, they're all important, but the first is the connectors are open and accepting. They have a clear vision. they trust, they come from a place of abundance, they believe in abundance, they are social and curious, they're conscientious, and they have a generous spirit. And I think that first and last one are really key bookends to the philosophy of a connector.
Very good. Again, so much content, and you just really put it in the front of our minds to think about this. If we do want to be a connector, or maybe our listeners are already connectors, but maybe they're stuck somewhere. So what are the most common mistakes people make when it comes to networking and connecting?
So I'm going to take that question in two directions. The first thing I'm going to say is what we said earlier, is that people network for need and they network for now, and they take a very me-focused approach and a short-term approach. So when we think about networking, we want to shift at least to relationship networking, right?
Right.
And connecting, and that means three major shifts. One is I'm going to talk about anything, not just about work, right? So from the what do you do to the what do you do for fun? Right? Just shifting that question a little bit. Shift number two is from the short term to the long term. This person that I'm connecting with might not have anything to do with my work right now, but if I'm enjoying that connection, who knows where that might lead? Who knows who they know? Who knows? Just who knows, right? So it's a long-term view. And the third is it's not about me. It's also not about them, right? Because that's just it's about me in reverse. It's about the relationship and the interaction between the two of you.
Wow. Yes.
So that's one place. The other thing that you kind of alluded to that I want to explain to your listeners is the connector spectrum. So one of the things I explain in chapter 3 of the book is that there is a spectrum. And I would say that probably all your listeners are on that spectrum of connector. When we think about a non-connector, that's somebody who doesn't think that relationships are even important. They don't value them. They don't prioritize them. They don't think that they are relevant to their success. They're like, no, it's just about my work product, or it's just about my intelligence, or I do this all on my own. Those are non-connectors. Guessing there's none in your audience. But we might have what we call emerging connectors. And emerging connectors are those that do believe in the value, and they're starting to do some of it, but they haven't built their confidence or their consistency around the behaviors and the attributes of a connector. Once we think about the levers that we can pull, okay, so this kind of goes to the mistake as well, because one of the mistakes is not stretching yourself, not trying, not putting yourself out there because of whatever the fear is, rejection, feeling pushy, prying, whatever it might be that we hesitate. So the first lever that we pull to move up the spectrum is initiate versus respond. The next kind of connector is a responsive connector. This is somebody who people will ask for a favor, they say yes. People will ask for an introduction, they'll say yes. They will respond to the requests that are incoming, but they're not initiating the outgoing. They're not bringing up the ideas themselves. So a responsive connector is great, but it's one directional. And so one of the mistakes is to not initiate, to not have that mindset of how can I help this person? What might they be interested in? One of the mistakes is not asking that specific question. At some point in a conversation with the person you're speaking to, what are you working on? How can I help you? Who do you want to connect with? Any of those questions will help you start to figure out, is there something that I can do to help this person? Generous spirit, right?
Right. Yes.
So as we start to initiate and respond, we are now an acting connector. And that's great. And that might be as far as you need to go up the spectrum. If you want to become a higher level connector, a super connector or a niche connector, we need to think about the other lever, which is the breadth and depth of your connections. So when we think about the depth, we're thinking about, you know, when you're somewhere and you say, oh, that guy knows everybody in town.
Yes.
Right? Or my sister knows everybody in real estate, New Jersey. Or that lady knows everybody in media. That's a niche connector. The niche might be a geographic location. It might be an industry. It might be a job function. But it's a niche where you know everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going deep. When we go broad And that's a niche connector, right? When we go broad, then we can be a super connector. And that breadth is about knowing people up and down the hierarchy, knowing people across different industries, across different geographies. And if you cross your country's borders, then you're a global super connector or a global niche connector. Mm. So really it's that depth and breadth that bring us, because, you know, when you want to think about being a connector, I hear a puppy in the background, which makes me want to just talk about dogs because I love dogs as well. And that would be me being a connector, because then I'd want to figure out the breed. And this is how we don't connect over what we do. We connect over what we like to do, what we want, what we dream of doing, what we have shared visions and values and experiences and people and places and causes, right? Yes. And one of my passions is animals, and I could just take our whole rest of our interview and talk about that. But I won't, because I know that's not what your audience is interested in. But I just wanted to give that example so that your editors do not edit out that dog barking.
And just a bit off topic here, you actually have some rescue dogs, I believe, too.
I do.
And we have 2 rescue dogs. So we too have a heart for animals. So thank you for sharing that.
And that's when, you know, you feel more of a heart connection to somebody else, because you get me and I get you on that front. And that's a place to start and to build from.
Yes, absolutely.
So I was in the middle of telling you about connectors or something else, but I lost my train of thought because I heard a dog bark.
That's fine. Roll with it. I have to tell you, I jumped on your website and I actually took the quiz.
Yes.
And I was a super connector. So can you share with our listeners where to find this quiz? And I would encourage our entire audience to jump over there and take that.
Absolutely. So if you go to my website, tillisledermen.com, and you click on the books and you go to the book, you'll see take the quiz, but you'll put a link and make it really easy for people. And it's a 3-minute quiz, 10 quick questions to try to start to gauge where do you fall on that spectrum and what are the ideas for you to move up to that next level.
Yes.
And do you even need to, right? My sister doesn't need to be a global super connector. She's a niche connector, and it's where she needs to be. And it's really about whatever it is you're working on. Oh, I know what I was talking about. Why we want to go up that connector spectrum is the idea of when we're tapping into the idea of a generous spirit, when we know more people, when we have access to more people, we are able to better connect and kind of make those matches happen. So it's, you know, I was on a call yesterday with a fellow coach, and she said, I saw your website, it's really good. Who was your web designer? And I told her, I said, would you like an intro? And she said, yes. And so I made an intro because I know people outside of coaching, and somebody needed a video editor, and I've got somebody, but somebody also needed a recommendation for a hotel in a place that I visited, and I've got. So it's really about thinking about how you can add value. And the more people that you know, even if you can't add the value, say, you know, I don't know, but I know somebody who does. Let me put you guys in touch.
Yeah. My wife is an introvert. And in your book, you wrote that introverts can be great connectors. That seems counterintuitive. So is it really possible for a wallflower to become a super connector?
Absolutely, 100%. And I married an introvert as well. So look at more we have in common. They say opposites attract.
Yes.
So I actually have in the 11 Laws of Likeability a section called Good News for the Introverts. And in the Connector's Vantage, it's called the Introvert's Edge. Because one of the things I want introverts to understand is that you are actually innately and uniquely positioned to be a powerful and super connector. And some of the best connectors I know are introverts. And there's a few reasons for that. First, and don't worry, extroverts, I'll tell you all the good things about you too. But first, the introverts are natural listeners, right? They have a natural sense of curiosity, and being social and curious is one of the things of an introvert. And when I say social, I don't mean social butterfly or life of the party. I mean social as a way of interacting with another person, curious about one other person. And that's where introverts are best, in the one-on-one. They're good at asking questions, they're good at listening, and they are not off-putting. Unlike me, who can come on a little strong, right? And set people off. Introverts don't do that. Where introverts need to stretch is where extroverts have a skill. So the introverts want to stretch by thinking about what they're willing to share. So you don't want, as an introvert, to just interrogate and machine gun questions out at people. What you want is to kind of be in an exchange, in a little dance. And so when you're asking questions, be willing to share information as well. Because when you share, what you're doing is you're embodying the mindset of trust. You're giving information, you're giving trust, you're being vulnerable. And vulnerability is openness, and it leads to credibility and connection. So that's where the introverts have innate skills and need to stretch. Now, I promise the extroverts, yes, you are great at making people feel comfortable. You can start a conversation, put people at ease, bring people in, work the room, work the crowd, and bring your energy. And that's fantastic. Where you need to stretch is to be a better listener. And to, honestly, what my husband would say, shut up once in a while.
I can so relate to that.
Give someone else a chance to speak, right?
Right, exactly. So I've always thought that people are born being good at connecting or not. But you describe a whole spectrum of connectors, which you did just share with us a few moments ago. But why is that?
So I think that people might be born with certain communication preferences, but that doesn't mean they're born a connector or a non-connector. This is learned behavior. And it was learned for me as well. I always liked people, but I also didn't understand some of the things that I needed to do to enable those connections. Trust wasn't something that came naturally to me, neither was abundance. And, social and curious, maybe that one came naturally, but having a clear vision, being open and accepting, right?
Right.
We like to be right. And it's very difficult to stay open and accepting when you want to be right. And what happens with human beings is that, and I'm kind of following a train of thought, so I have no idea if I answered your question, but you'll come back and ask me if I didn't. But what this made me think about is the idea of when we meet somebody, we draw conclusions very quickly. And that's great. That's natural. We're smart people. We do that. We have to do it. But to stay open and accepting the core fundamental mindset of a connector, we need to stay open to being wrong. We need to stay in a place of curiosity versus conclusion to allow ourselves to bring in additional information. And I give 4 questions in the book to help you do that so that you slow your thinking down. And you don't have to ask all 4 questions, but any of those questions help slow your thinking down so you can look for contrary information and stay open to this other person.
Yeah. Well, a lot of good nuggets there. Oh my gosh, I could have a conversation with you all day because for me and many of our listeners, we love connecting. Sometimes I think we don't have confidence in our ability to do it the right way. There are other people who, like you mentioned earlier, look at it from a standpoint of what's in it for me versus what can I do to help someone. And that was a skill that it took me a while to learn that. But one of the things that, if I look back over my ability to connect people, one of the things that really hit me hard one time is I met with a woman. She's a professional photographer. I scheduled a coffee date at Panera Bread. We met, and the entire time, and again, this was through trial and error, I had a notepad out and I was asking her questions about herself. How did you end up here? What, where were you before? Why did you, just all kinds of questions, looking for that connection. And we talked for about 30 minutes. And at the end of that 30-minute conversation, she had tears in her eyes because I ended that conversation with, what can I do to best serve you? And she looked at me with those tears and she said, I thought you wanted to meet with me to sell me something, but you really made me feel important. Can you speak to that and why putting ourselves out of the picture and building on the relationship is so important? Because you mentioned some of that in your book about relationships.
People remember more how you make them feel than anything that you say. And that's the idea of mood memory. And that mood memory is greatest at the start and at the end of the conversation, which is why I love at the end of a conversation for somebody to say, how can I help you? What do you need? And I want to make sure I also talk about the flip side of that. So please make sure I come back to the concept of having a clear vision.
Absolutely.
Because when you show interest in somebody else, when you make somebody, people listen best when they feel they've been heard. So by asking questions, by showing interest, by showing that you're listening, you make somebody feel valued and heard. Now, hopefully she was willing to ask questions of you as well and to make it an exchange, because you don't want it to all be one-sided.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you leave time and maybe intersperse a little bit of sharing as you do it, but don't redirect all the way back on you, right? You kind of give a little and then go back to asking your questions. But that feeling of, do I want to meet with this person again? And if this person is not just after something, but they're after a connection, then there's more to be had here. And I'm not afraid of it. I'm not going to be like, no, that was it. That was 30 minutes I can never get back in my life. Right.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And there's also the idea of reciprocity, right? Which I don't
yes.
love the idea of reciprocity, to be honest with you. It exists and it's relevant, but it's not what I want you to be thinking about. When you give, right? Because you want to, because you get to, because you had that spirit of generosity, people will want to reciprocate, but it might not be linear. It might not be, I give to you, you give to me.
Mm-hmm.
It might be, I give to you, you give to somebody else. And that's okay as well. And then you might tell the person, because of you, I did this.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually do that quite a bit. So I do want to come back to the end of that conversation, because at the end of that conversation, anybody who's listening to this will ask the question. And let's say the person you talk to also listened to this, and then they ask you the question. I want to make sure you have an answer to the question, because that's what the connector's advantage is. Faster, easier, better results, right? The advantage of being a connector is whatever it is you're working on, you are going to get that result faster, easier, and better. A better result than you could have expected. So in order to get that result, you actually have to have a clear vision of what you're working on.
Yes.
And without that clarity, you won't get the advantage. You can still be a connector, but you won't necessarily get as great an advantage of it.
Can you share with us a moment where you were connecting that you might have had a shift yourself that helped you understand the power of the connector's advantage, even on a deeper level?
I am not sure what you're getting at.
So as you're writing this book, and you've done a lot of research, you have a wealth of experience, but when you're connecting with other people, so for me, so I had an idea about what a connector was and thinking that I'm a great connector, but as I'm reading your book, I'm like, wait, there's an opportunity for me to level up.
Yes. Okay. Now I got you.
Okay.
So yes. And actually, my first draft of the book is not what the book is. I actually completely changed the last section of the book into be an inclusive connector, expand and diversify your connections, because that was me realizing I needed to level up. And one of the things that I did while I was writing the book is I reached out to some of my connections, and I am connected to a lot of amazing other authors and coaches and speakers and CEOs. And I had them donate their expertise to the book and contribute sidebars or concepts within the book. And Robbie Samuels is one of them. And he helped open my eyes in this last section of the book about being an inclusive connector. And that is something that for me, I was at a conference after meeting him and watching him. And he went up to the person who seemed like they might be a little out of place to introduce himself. And I borrowed that from him. And the idea is to be a host, right? So wherever you are, in whatever situation, to have a host mindset, meaning it is your desire to make other people feel comfortable and to look for the person who might feel out of place, who might be the unicorn in the room, and invite them to sit with you And I do it all the time. And the funniest thing, oh, I'll tell you a fun story. I was at a huge conference, 1,500 people, all speakers, and I see a woman sitting alone eating lunch. And I walk over to her. I said, at this event, nobody should be eating alone. May I join you? And she said, sure. So I went and got my lunch. I sat down. We start chatting. And we're talking about kids. We're talking about all this other stuff, how, you know, and then she told me that she was the founder of TEDx. And I mean, and I was, it was one of those, you know, and I was like, you mean TEDx? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, so you wanted to eat alone.
That's awesome.
And she smiled and she took my hands, and somebody who was sitting at another table took a picture of this moment and texted it to me because he was watching us. And she took my hand. She said, no, because you sat down for me, not for you. And it was this, and I didn't know who she was, and we're still in touch, and she's just an amazing, lovely woman. And the person who knew who she was that I just sat down next to said, and with her holding my hands in hers, sent me this picture and said, you're unbelievable, Michelle.
I actually just got goosebumps as you were sharing that story where she said you sat down for her. Wow.
Yeah.
That is such a good thing for our listeners to hear, because I think oftentimes we see that person, but I think that in my belief, sometimes we feel like we see that person and that could easily be us. So we try to avoid them because it might be a little uncomfortable for us. And again, we're putting our emotion into it and our feelings, but you just saw that and made it happen. And that's such a good tip and a good nugget, because you, as you mentioned earlier, do not know where that connection will lead. It may never lead to any sort of business, but it could lead to a lifelong friendship. And there's value in that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you, Michelle, for sharing that. So well, we talked about leveling up. So how did you discover the 7 mindsets of connectors that you do write about?
I actually did a survey. So I actually partnered with the university to get qualified questions on certain attributes. And I had a thesis about what I thought were the attributes and the behaviors of a connector's mindset. And so I, got about 1,000 people to take the survey. And I actually found that the majority of the people were connectors. So I actually partnered with some people who had introverted networks to make sure that we got, a more dispersed sample setting. And it was fascinating because what I realized was I was totally wrong. My thesis was totally wrong. I believed that we had innate tendencies, and the research showed that there wasn't huge differences. And I talk about the research in the book, but one of the things that I did see, the biggest difference I saw in the statistics was that connectors get a sense of satisfaction from the act of connecting others. And it was like off the charts, whereas non-connectors didn't get that sense of satisfaction just for that act. And so there was a joy or a pleasure in that act that was fulfilling. And that was the biggest differentiator. But basically, when doing that research, we kind of saw the ideas that evolved out of there. And that's kind of where we came up with the mindsets.
Nice. Do you have your next book already in mind?
No, I'm taking a break. I am focused on making sure the work of the Connectors Advantage gets out there. I think we still have a lot of information to get out there. And I'm on a podcast. My son is walking in my office right now. I don't know what you want.
He wants to see his mom. It's all good.
Oh, he's so going to get it for that one later.
You know what? It just shows that you're real, you're genuine. So we just go with that.
And you know what? I don't mind that those things stay in here, because the truth is, one of the benefits of working from home these days are those interruptions. And that makes us more of a whole person. And that makes us more relatable and connectable.
Yes,
Make up my
absolutely.
own word.
Absolutely. So you have the book club coming up July 1st. Our listeners can find out more about you by visiting your website.
It is Michelle, Michelle, Tillis, Tillis, Lederman, Lederman.com. And from there, you can find all of the social media platforms that I'm on, and my YouTube channel, my blog, and I've got a free gift pack. And I actually, if you're joining the club, we have 2 book specials going on. It depends on if you want 1 book or 2, but you can, grab the book and gift the book. I love giving the gift of connection. And make sure that you tell me where you heard me, because I always love to figure out how we got connected. And there's lots of freebies in there. All the links are below, I'm sure.
Yes, absolutely. I do want to let our listeners know that you have a lot of these things that you are going to be sharing, but I love on your website that you can gift a book, and that just goes in alignment with who you are and how you show up. So my hat's off to you.
We started it over the holidays because it was a really fun gift, especially to give to a group of employees or coworkers.
Yes.
And so they would send me, basically when you purchase it online, you fill out a little form, and I would write a personalized note. I would inscribe it personally, put a bookmark in, put it in a pretty little package and ship it out, US only. If you're outside the US, email me, we'll figure it out. And the shipping was included, and it was giving the gift of connection. It was so popular, we just kept it going.
Nice. So let's end this with this podcast today. Let's end this with, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Okay. What do you love to do outside of connecting with people? I hear that you are an expert chauffeur for your sons.
I am, but that's not necessarily what I like to do. I love to travel. Okay. Although I connect with loads and new interesting people on my travels. I love to travel. I'm an adrenaline junkie. I have gone skydiving, scuba diving,
nice.
Swam with sharks, love a little adventure, zip lining. And I love anything with animals.
And did I read correctly that you just learned how to ride a bike?
Yeah, I'm not so good at that.
That's awesome. So, of course, we want people to pick up a copy of your book. And I can speak from just as I'm starting to dive into it, it's already a hot mess because I'm highlighting stuff and having these aha moments. And I think any business person, anyone who wants to learn how to deepen their connection skills should be reading this book. And I'm so thrilled to hear about the book club that you have coming up in July. Outside of that, what other things can you recommend for our listeners to help hone their skills? Because many people in our audience, they want to build a solid referral based network, and it begins with relationships. So what can we end this today to help them do that?
Keep having the conversation. Always have a conversation, whether you think there's a reason for it or not. Engage fully in that conversation. Ask the question of, how can I help? When you help, people want to stay connected to you, and the network grows. And don't forget to make sure that you know what you're working on and to share it, because then you will stay front of mind for them. And it's not necessarily having to ask, but it's a share.
Yes. Thank you so much, Michelle. Again, what an honor to have you on today. I am excited that we reached out to, our team reached out to you. I'm excited to finish reading The Connector's Advantage, and I've already queued up the Likeability book. What's the full title of that, and where can our listeners pick these books up at?
Sure, the 11 Laws of Likeability, Relationship Networking, because people do business with people they like. They're in your bookstore, they're on Amazon, they're on my website, whatever's easiest for all of you. And honest Amazon reviews are always appreciated. I love a good review, or an honest review, I always say. It was a pleasure being on, and I love that your book is all highlighted. That just makes my day.
Thank you. Listen, you have an outrageously productive, connector-filled day. So thank you again so much for joining us. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Take care.